Hello, and welcome to BooK.eD on Shalom World TV, where we introduce Christian books. I'm your host, Claire Hinshaw. Today we have with us Dr. Thomas McGovern, the author of What Christ Suffered, A Doctor's Journey Through the Passion. Dr. McGovern completed his MD at Mayo Medical School and spent 8 years in the U.S. Army. He trained in Mohs surgery and cutaneous oncology at Yale University School of Medicine and has practiced Mohs surgery and reconstruction in Fort Wayne since 2000. He currently serves on the Catholic Medical Association National Board and co-hosts Doctor, the official weekly radio program and podcast of the CMA, which airs on EWTN. Dr. McGovern, welcome to BooK.eD.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here, and I have to tell you, when I first started looking at What Christ Suffered, I thought it sounded very interesting, and I was intrigued by the premise of a doctor kind of studying what Christ suffered throughout his passion, but I wasn't sure how it would be helpful spiritually. And then it surprised me right in the introduction, you addressed that yourself when you said that you would only write the book as long as I could see how such a book could help others come to love Jesus more by moving this knowledge from their heads to their hearts. So I would love to hear from you how you think What Christ Suffered accomplishes that, and how studying these details of Christ's passion can help the reader in his own spiritual journey.
Those are great questions. That's why I resisted calls to write a book for so many years. And I told the Lord I'd only write it if a publisher asked me to, and one finally did. So the way I've tried to overcome that is first to remember what an old song says. To know him is to love him. And that was about the singer's father. But how much more to Christ? So remember the first time we fell in love with somebody. We wanted to learn everything we could about them. We'd stay up late into the night sharing stories. How much more should we want to do that with Christ, who loves us more than anybody else? And as Fulton Sheen said, Christ is the only person who was born with the specific purpose of dying, because that's how he would save us. So we should get to know him in his dying. So what I did in the book is try to combine two things that I haven't seen combined in any other book. One, trying to unravel some of the misconceptions over what crucifixion was like by doing some really in-depth research, both historically and medically. But then second, taking some teaching on suffering from the church and combining that with the suffering of Christ and interweaving the story of suffering itself with the suffering of Christ and how we can make it personal. Because that's really the only way I think we can make suffering personal. And the meaning of suffering is salvation. And a lot of people don't realize that in our suffering, we have a superpower, the same superpower Jesus had. We're all baptized as what? Priest, prophet, and king. What does it mean to be a priest? It means that we can offer sacrifice on behalf of others for their salvation. So because Christ could do that, we are able to participate in that. So we can offer our suffering in order that someone else's salvation might be affected. We can influence eternity. And I try to gradually make that point through the book that, wow, not only is suffering not wasted, but it's incredibly valuable. And sometimes the only thing we can do with our suffering is there's no good intellectual answer to why, but sometimes gazing at Christ in the crucifix and then knowing better what that crucifix means, it helps us to at least receive an answer that's not in words, but maybe in a gaze or in the accompaniment of Christ with us.
Wow, that is so wonderful. And I have to tell you, I had these questions going into the book, but now after reading it, I found myself over the past couple of days as I'm praying the sorrowful mysteries, I'm thinking of the things that I learned in this book, and I'm realizing, oh, if I had just read it, it would have answered the question itself. This is so helpful to dive deeper into that relationship with Christ. But you mentioned weaving in the teachings of the church throughout the book, and that was something that surprised me right off the bat. You said that we're not just going to be journeying with Christ in his sufferings, But we're also going to do, I think you said, a parallel journey with Pope St. John Paul II, and specifically through
Yes,
his teaching in Salvifici Doloris. And I would love
yes.
to know what inspired you to incorporate that and how you thought it would be helpful in this study of the Passion.
I've written a series of courses in the past for catechesis for men based on different papal documents. And then when I got involved with the Catholic Medical Association, it was suggested that I write one on suffering, which was a great idea because in my medical training, I spent exactly 0 hours in classes learning about what suffering is and how to deal with it myself or in patients. And you'd think it would be really important to medical people. So back in 2013, I had written a course based on Salvifici Doloris. And so when the opportunity to write the book came up, I thought it was natural to integrate it. So why go even further than the Gospels? Well, I heard a great analogy about the development of church doctrine. It's like when you come out of the bright sunlight and into a room that's full of beautiful things. But at first, all you can make out are the shapes. You can't see the details. But with time, as your eyes adjust, you can see more details. Well, everything, all church teaching is implicit in the Bible, in the scriptures, but some of it doesn't become explicit for centuries. What? It took over 1,800 years to definitively declare Mary's Immaculate Conception and over 1,900 for the Assumption. So the reason I incorporated John Paul is the same reason he wrote it, to help us better understand and apply in our lives what is in the Gospels. And one of the key lines I learned, in fact, when I inscribe a book for somebody, it's the phrase I put in there: everything has a price, and the price of love is suffering. If there's no love, there's no suffering. And if there is love, there will be suffering. It's the way we were made.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have to tell
I just
you,
steal the
one of
best
the things
ideas.
I love it. Well, one of the things that really surprised me when I started the book was I knew obviously you were going to go into the medical details of the Passion, but you spent a whole chapter right at the beginning on historical details and geographical details, and then you bring those up throughout the book as well. And that really surprised me. I was wondering why you thought it was important. It seemed like you were kind of setting the stage with those. And why did you think that was important to begin with?
Well, you said one of the key words there, stage, uh, because on the stage, something takes place. And Christianity is an enfleshed, it's an embodied religion. Unlike most other religions, the Passion is the story of how Jesus gave his body so that we might be saved. And his body was at a specific place in a specific time. St. John Paul elaborated on that in his theology of the body, audience, and teachings. So many people might think the gospel story is just that, just a story, but is it true? Did it really happen? It's not only a true story, it's true history. And I've been to the Holy Land 3 times now, and it took place in a relatively small area. And when you realize that it really happened, it somehow becomes more personal. I found it incredibly rewarding to just sit and reflect on gospel passages in the places where they actually happened. And they did actually happen. This is a true story.
Wow, that is so powerful. And I can only imagine with the knowledge that you have from all your research and then going to these places, that must be such an incredible experience. Which, one of the things that you bring up in the book that I had never really thought about before, and I probably shouldn't speak for everyone, but I think generally when people think about the Passion, we think obviously of the crucifixion itself, but also the scourging and the crowning with thorns. Something we, or at least I, don't usually think of is that time in the night between Holy Thursday and Good Friday. But you spent a whole chapter on this, and I was wondering why you thought that was important to include and how it came to you that this was an important time period to look into.
It was a surprise. My first trip to the Holy Land, I expected to see the places where all those things you said happened. The way of the cross, to spend some time on Calvary and in the empty tomb, time in Gethsemane. But then on our pilgrimage, we were taken to this place called St. Peter in Gallicantu, which is this Dominican monastery built over the pit that was under the house of Caiaphas. If you think about it, Jesus' passion lasted roughly 18 hours, from roughly 9 o'clock on Holy Thursday night till 3 p.m. Good Friday morning. And so there's like 6 hours in the middle of the night that they are mentioned in the gospel, but I didn't really think about it till I was in that pit where they had to lower Jesus with kind of a harness of rope trussed under him so he could get in this pit. There weren't any stairs at the time. There are now so that pilgrims can get down there. And what happened in there? The gospel writers tell us that Jesus was met with blows. So he's slapped in the face, he's punched in the face, they spit on him, they bind him up, they blindfold him, ask, prophesy, who is it who struck you? But then Luke, the physician, and very detail oriented apparently, adds something else. He uses this word that has the same prefix in Greek as dermis or dermatology or skin. It's durantes. And it implies kind of a whipping, or not a scourging, something a little different, more a flogging with sticks that are up to half an inch in diameter. And they're actually marks on the Shroud of Turin, which would account for such marks. And so for 6 hours, his friends are away. He has nothing to eat, nothing to drink. He's not allowed to sleep, and he's tortured. And that only adds to the pain and suffering that he will endure. And when a pilgrim goes down in there, we recite Psalm 88. I am counted among those among the dead who have gone down into the pit. It's incredibly moving.
I have to say, I'm so glad you did include that, because it just, for me personally, gave me a whole new aspect of the Passion to contemplate. And on a personal level, I have a friend who's been suffering with terrible insomnia. And I was reading that and I said, Addie, you are with Christ right now. He suffered this too. Like everything that we suffer, it seems we can find in the Passion, and we can unite with his suffering.
Yes.
But I have one final question that is not directly related to the book, but it was something that occurred to me while I was reading it, and I would love to get your insight after all your research. I had heard many years ago this claim or theory that Christ was divinely allowed to suffer more than a human being can usually survive because of his mission to save us and how great our sins are that he had to carry. I was wondering if your research, if you were enlightened at all on that, or if it's something that came up at all, and what you would say to that idea.
It seems to be a parallel question to, did Christ supernaturally know the moment at which he was going to die? And in my book, I argue the answer is no. There was a natural explanation for how he knew the end was near. So in like manner, I haven't read about what you said. I did a little research and some reflection on it. And to me, it would not seem consistent with the rest of the Gospels, because we never see Jesus doing anything beyond what a human being can do for his own sake. We only see him doing miracles for others. We never see him do anything that extends his abilities to benefit himself. It says in the Catechism, paragraph 467, which is from the Council of Chalcedon in 451, that Jesus was like us in all ways, but sin. So it seems like all ways would also include his ability to suffer. Now, I believe he did more with a human organism, with a human body, than any of us have ever done. He was always completely present to people as much as he could be. He was always focused on what he was supposed to be doing. So I think he probably suffered to the full, but it's like when they say an athlete gives 110%, there's no such thing. 100% is the limit. I believe he gave 100%, and that he didn't need to give any more than that. Now, I could be wrong. It's all speculation, but you asked and I thought about it.
Well, that makes sense to me.
Let the homage commence. After providing Jesus with the three physical attributes of his kingly power, crown, robe, and staff, his subjects used them to pay him a grisly anti-homage. After letting Jesus hold his scepter in his hand, Matthew and Mark note that the soldiers struck his head with the reed. Of course, these evangelists want us to know that the soldiers used the reed to drive the thorns more deeply into the scalp of Jesus and enlarge the thorn-induced wounds, since the soldiers would not have wanted to cut themselves doing this with their hands. Jesus didn't go it alone. Why should we? Sometimes in our own suffering, we reject help from others and think that we can handle it ourselves. However, Jesus showed us in his suffering that even he needed help to carry his cross. If he can do it alone, without Simon, why should we expect ourselves to be any different? Jesus knows what it's like to be lonely. Although he needed help carrying the cross, someone had to be forced to help him. Imagine how lonely it must have been for him to carry that cross along narrow, crowded streets with people hurling insults, or even worse, simply ignoring him. Because the truth is that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. When to ask why. In this chapter, we have gazed in our imaginations at the original crucifix and seen Jesus die. There can be no better place for us to ask why we suffer. When tempted to ask why about your suffering or that of someone you love, do it while gazing at Jesus on the cross. When Christ answers our why of suffering, he doesn't give reasons. He issues a call. He says, "Follow me, come, take part through your suffering in this work of saving the world, a salvation achieved through my suffering." When I was 6 or 7 years old, I used to take my little red wagon 6 blocks to the Carnegie Public Library. I'd park my wagon, walk down the steps into the basement, into the children's section. And over on the left side at the base of the stairs, there were several shelves full of books that all started with the title, "When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a," fill in the blank, "an astronaut, architect, archaeologist, teacher, scientist, doctor, engineer." And I used to take 30 books at a time home to my playhouse, into my bedroom, and read them and dream about the future. And I've never lost the joy in reading that I found even at that young age. Well, I only have one book to go by, but this book has 700 hours of work into it. So, in this kind of book, I have to have a lot of references. So, I get the best information I could find on the subject, then find those who think that that information is wrong and read them, talk to experts, in my case, on the shroud, on the history of crucifixion, medical doctors in other specialties, get a lot of articles in interlibrary loan, take a lot of notes, put them together, and it's a whole lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too. Well, my two favorite Catholic authors, I have a favorite living one, Peter Kraft, who was a philosopher at Boston College, and my favorite one in the great hereafter is G.K. Chesterton. Uh, Peter Kraft writes brilliant books, either Q&A or dialogue books between Socrates and others. Some of the favorite ones, though, are Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Heaven But Was Afraid to Ask, or his book on angels and demons, or Christianity for Modern Pagans. With Chesterton, his biographies of Thomas Aquinas and St. Francis have been hailed as the greatest ever written, and you really get to meet them as people. But he also wrote the only epic poem that I have ever enjoyed reading. It's the one called Lepanto, on the Battle of Lepanto. And of course, his Father Brown mysteries. I love mysteries, and to see a priest who's a solid Catholic is wonderful. And finally, Benedict XVI. Anything by him is so clear and easy to understand, especially as Jesus of Nazareth. It takes a two-dimensional image of Jesus and makes it fully robust and three-dimensional. We all want to be better versions of ourselves. And sometimes just reading about sterile, virtue, not in context, doesn't help. But seeing a person live it, it makes me want to emulate it. I recently read a biography for his cause for canonization of Dr. Jerome Lejeune, the first man to discover the genetic cause of a disease, that there was an extra chromosome in people with what's called Down syndrome. He received the highest award a worldwide geneticist could receive, gave a talk, and called out other geneticists for using his finding to decide which babies to abort. In this celebratory speech, he was ignored. There was silence at the end of it. He wrote to his wife, "Tonight I lost my Nobel Prize." And yet he continued to live his life like that, found the Pontifical Academy for Life, and give me an image of what a physician should be like. You don't write books to make money. You do it because you have an idea worth sharing that can hopefully change other lives for the better. You also learn that it's a lot of work and you don't always feel creative. It doesn't always flow, but you do it anyway. And oftentimes the creative moments come elsewhere, when I'm running or in the shower. And then I hurriedly write down the idea, like starting each chapter, like in a mystery book, listing what others have said about the Passion. Is it true or not? Read through the book, the chapter, and then find at the end, so were they right or were they wrong?
Well, there is so much more we could talk about. I would love to stay on with you for another hour, but unfortunately, we're reaching the end of our time together. But thank you so
Sure.
much for being with us, Dr. McGovern, and I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It is a distinct privilege to talk about Dr. McGovern's book. First, I've had very, very significant similarities in my interest in this subject. I also started with an interest in medical school. In fact, the same article that stimulated Dr. McGovern's interest is the one that stimulated my interest in 1986. And I've been interested in this topic and done significant reading over the past 3.5 decades. And out of all the books, the dozens of books that I've read about the Passion and Crucifixion, this is the first that synthesizes the information really going back over the better part of 2 centuries. This not only presents the gospel descriptions of this episode, but thoroughly the historical and the theological evidence and the archaeological evidence that goes along with it. The analysis of the various theories and opinions that prior investigators and authors have raised is thorough. But then Dr. McGovern offers his own impressions and very convincing arguments to support his impressions. And his humility is evident. If there is an area that he is not certain, he will say so. He will not propose something that he does not have support for. And I particularly recommend the appendix. You don't find too many books where the appendix is recommended. This appendix is very long, and it is a treasure trove of information for further reading. In essence, Dr. McGovern is really the first author that really emphasizes in a thoroughgoing fashion the connection between the theological and the scientific evidence pertinent to the Passion and the Crucifixion of Christ. And most meaningful and really, I would say, revolutionary in these type of writings is he discusses it in light of the principle of suffering and love require each other. One does not exist without the other. And the references he makes to the writings of John Paul II are particularly important in this. This is a book that I'm confident will be engaging, important, and impactful to any reader, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, whether their interest is religious or historical or philosophical or archaeological. There is something here for everyone with their interests. And if they particularly attend to the relationship between this event and the importance of suffering and the value of suffering in light of God's love, this will be can be a life-changing book. This book sets a new standard for this study, and it is the study of the most important event in the history of mankind. I'd recommend it without reservation, and I would encourage anyone to read it and refer to it often. It will change your life.
Thank you for joining us for Booked on Shalom World TV. Join us next week to hear more about Christian books. Until then, happy reading.
Are you searching for fulfillment? Discover true happiness. Stay tuned to Shalom World.